Good afternoon. My name is Maya Bay. I'm the Executive Director of the Arab American Institute. On behalf of the 12 other co-conveners, thank you again for being with us this afternoon. Our panel began by setting the stage for why this is something that impacts us all. If we had a trigger warning for this gathering, this would be my panel now. The reason we are all here, the reason you all have joined us online for this conversation, is to discuss what Palestinians are enduring today. I want to start immediately by going to you, Vivian, Khalaf, who's with the Palestine Children's Relief Fund. You've been doing incredible work on the ground. If you can start by sharing with us the conditions now as we know them.
Thank you, Maya, and thank you to everyone here today. I want to start by saying that I feel at home here within the four walls of the Rainbow Push Coalition. And allow me to please, thank you. And because I'm home, I want to say that I have never been more proud to be a Palestinian than I am today. Living conditions have always been difficult in Gaza, and the PCRF has been on the ground in Gaza for the last 30 years, way before October 7th. But in the last 100 or so days, Gaza has become a living hell. We have been hearing it through the voices of our staff who are entirely displaced since October 7th, many of whom we have still lost contact with. Tens and thousands of people, mostly women and children, have been killed or injured, and over 1,000 children are either trapped, missing, or presumed dead. A public health disaster is unfolding. Infectious diseases are spreading in overcrowded shelters as human waste and sewage is spilling over. Some 180 Palestinian women a day, 180 women a day are ready to give birth. People are facing the highest levels of food insecurity ever recorded. You hear that famine is around the corner. No, my friends, famine has arrived in Gaza. Over half of the population of Gaza, and you've heard this time and time again, but it needs to be reinforced, are under the age of 18. Over 1.1 million children packed into one of the most populated territories in the world, the majority of whom are displaced along with their families and staying in overcrowded shelters run by UN humanitarian aid agencies, or are literally on the ground in the hospitals in Gaza that are still partially functioning. Thousands of families are even sleeping in the open air as temperatures are beginning to drop. For children in particular, and that is where PCRF is primarily concerned with, because that is what we do. We help children obtain medical care and life-saving surgeries that they wouldn't otherwise have access to. Those are in normal circumstances. But for children in particular, over the last 3 months, it has been nothing short of traumatic. No food, no water, no school, nothing but the terrifying sounds of bombs, of explosions, of falling buildings. That's what children are hearing day in and day out and throughout the night. Children are sustaining complex injuries who need multiple surgeries. They've sustained burns on well over 50% of their bodies. They're being treated without sufficient medical supplies. Maybe 1 or 2 tablets of Tylenol to ease their pain and suffering. Amputations are being performed as a method of first resort because surgeries aren't possible, and they're occurring without sufficient anesthesia. Hospitals don't have fuel to operate any generators that they may still have that are functional in order to power things like ventilator machines that is needed for surgery. We have all seen the images on our television screens of doctors performing surgeries with the light shining from their cell phones. When have we ever seen anything like this? Areas where civilians were told to relocate, as many of our staff have been told, relocate for their safety are being bombed as soon as they arrive, being bombed to rubble. Hospitals are being targeted. Our cancer department at Rantisi Hospital in Gaza was bombed, a hospital that housed children, the only department of its kind in Gaza that offers chemotherapy treatment and drugs to our children was bombed. They're being attacked and are only partially functioning, these hospitals, many hanging by a thread. They're overwhelmed and lack the necessary supplies that are flooded with people seeking safety. I tell you this because now we all need to question the morality and the legality of striking medical facilities. There is no safe haven in Gaza anymore. Never was. But now more than ever, nothing is safe, nowhere is safe, nobody is safe, not even in a hospital. I was last in Gaza in March, and I can tell you that Gaza is now unrecognizable to me or to any of the people who live there. It is uninhabitable. People are screaming for help, yet the words are falling on deaf ears. The world is watching as the onslaught continues. According to Save the Children, and I'm going to use their statistics because I believe in it, and the UN has also confirmed that more than 10 children a day lose a limb over the last 100 days of this brutal conflict. 10 children a day, with many losing multiple limbs. PCRF has helped children in the past with lower limb prosthetics. We've been used to seeing one limb lost by a child. Now we're seeing multiple limbs, 2 arms and a leg, or 2 legs and an arm, in some cases, 3 limbs. You know, I have so much more to say, and time is short, and you know, I have to, and I'm sure we're going to be hearing more from the other speakers, and I'm sure there's some personal stories many have to tell. But let me end by saying that this tragedy will ultimately end, right? It's got to end. But for the generations to come, these 12 weeks, and we're still counting, of hell, and the assaults on the most basic principles of humanity will never, ever be forgotten. While Gaza has shown us the worst of humanity, it has also shown a bright light on a population and a people that are resilient, that are steadfast. And they have shown us many, many examples of heroes. We need the world's help. These children have the right to live in dignity, but first and foremost, we have to call on the global community to do whatever they can to stop the bombing. We need a ceasefire in order to allow humanitarian aid to enter Gaza and enter in the quantities that is required, not this piecemeal drop in a bucket humanitarian aid that you hear entering Gaza. It's not getting to where it needs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vivian, who's chair of the Palestine Children's Relief Fund. Thank you for all the work that you are doing. Next, I want to go to Hani Almadhoun, who could be here with us today in his capacity with UNRWA USA, but regretfully, Hani has also endured a great deal personally coming from Gaza. Hani, I want to turn it over to you and ask that you share with us an update both on the work that is happening and what you are hearing.
Clear to me, but I'm happy to be here. I hope it's better circumstances. I come to you from Washington, D.C., from our headquarter office for UNRWA USA, and it's a lot. You know, we've been going through a lot as an NGO that supports UNRWA. As you know, UNRWA is the largest humanitarian actor inside Gaza right now, and UNRWA USA supports that work. Because of the generosity of American donors, we've been able to respond a lot. But as you know, nothing is enough. Everybody have failed Gaza because of the situation where, despite this, you know, our colleagues at UNRWA continue to work around the clock. As we speak, there's 5,000 UNRWA staff working in Gaza in the warehouses, in the shelters, in the clinics. And despite of everything, they're not able to respond to the scale of this humanitarian disasters. We're looking at 85% of the people in Gaza are internally displaced, including many family members and friends of mine. And a lot of them are in Rafah. And as you know, UNRWA is working in Gaza, but they've been limited to the south area, the middle area. And frankly, the most heated battles are right now happening in Khan Yunis, so that also limits UNRWA to working in Rafah. From day one, they told UNRWA leave the north. So we estimate there's about 300 to 450,000 folks in Gaza, including pretty much all my family. They're in Mashrou' Beitlaya. They have not gotten anything in Gaza. They're really starved and dehydrated. The aid is not getting in there. The Israelis are not allowing UNRWA to operate in those areas, on top of targeting UNRWA vehicles and staff. You may have read this. 146 UNRWA staff have been killed inside Gaza, which is the largest humanitarian casualties in the history of the United Nations. More than 150 installations of UNRWA have been targeted directly or indirectly. And there is serious damages at the schools and facilities. As we speak, there is 1.4 million Palestine refugees or internally displaced people living in 154 buildings. That's roughly 65% of the population of Gaza, reduced to 154 installations. When I say installations, they're mostly schools, but they could be training centers like vocational training centers, warehouses, and what have you. And as we move into the winter, things are pretty much complicated because one, not more aid is getting in. There is aid is coming in now, but not as much or nearly as much as needed. In a good day now, sometimes you get 200 trucks, and those numbers are tricky because if they've shut the water for Gaza, so it's hard to get water. If you only wanted to bring in drinking water inside Gaza, you would need 1,200 trucks a day. So when they tell you 200 trucks, 300 trucks, well, that's good. It's better than 20 where we started. But remember, those aid is not getting into the north, and that's a problem. And to be frank with you, and the south is chaotic, very issues of safety. There is a lot of almost desperate situations where folks are not, waiting the line or have to wait for half an hour to get a bag of flour. There is a lot of tension. And naturally, this is by design. This is a starvation attempt to get the Palestine folks in Gaza to feel the pain of the military campaign. And there is really nobody safe in Gaza. As you know, there is no more places to go. You're talking about a place that's 10 minutes east to west. Imagine if you get in a car, drive for 10 minutes, that's it. If you bomb somebody in one side, they hear it in the other end. So it is unfortunate. On top of this, UNRWA is facing a lot of misinformation campaigns as the agency works around the clock to deliver aid. We have to answer to rumors often generated by right-wing websites to try to discredit the agency or go after funding for the agency. I'm sure you've heard a lot of that. On top of us being mandated to protect the refugees, we're not able to protect the staff. We're not able to protect the warehouses. In fact, when we talk about folks who died inside UNRWA shelters, there is 313 people that's been documented to be taken safety inside UNRWA facilities that have been killed. And I do not, those numbers include the facilities in north of Gaza because UNRWA does not have staff in the north of Gaza. So it's hard to verify those informations, like at Al-Fakhura school, where there is reported social media accounts show the massacre. The Bin Zayed school, where you've seen this footage of unclothed men. That's a lot of numbers there, but sadly nobody's able to go verify those because the north has been shut off. I know from personal accounts, even if you get the most mundane injury in Gaza, you may probably risk death. We've seen a cousin of ours, Abu Wasim, he got shot in his leg and bleeded and passed away 2 weeks after his injury. If hospitals don't have water and electricity, how much life-saving services they can provide. We've seen ambulances not able to go around and move patients around. There is a lot of efforts, heroic efforts. At one point, UNRWA issued a statement that said we no longer have a humanitarian operation in Gaza. We cannot call it that because, we call it humanitarian opportunism, which basically when we see a road that's open And we know that we can get to deliver the aid like in areas of Khan Yunis. We take that opportunity, despite the fact that there is really close coordinations with the Israeli authorities. There is, I believe, twice a day, the coordinates of UNRWA's facilities and vehicles and fleet are given to the Israeli authorities, but that doesn't stop the attacks. The most recent one, I believe, in the last day of the year, where UNRWA got a permit to go to the north, deliver some food for Gaza City. And then when the fleet came back, a vehicle sustained some major damage by an Israeli attack. And in fact, I look at the report today, which comes from yesterday, we've seen schools in Deir al-Balah and Khan Yunis where a mother and her daughter get injured by drones. So UNRWA was working, trying to help bring aid. And remember, the operation, the humanitarian aid getting into Gaza, it's tricky. There is a lot of wait line, there is a lot of queue. It's not an excuse for people not to act. We ask people to support the humanitarian work and response. It just happened that UNRWA has been really the default, de facto, and humanitarian actor inside Gaza. There's many charities that do things with a smaller footprint, like cooking meals, preparing meals, trying to buy the produce if they can and give it away. Those are very helpful, but we're talking about tons, metric tons of flour, fortified cookies that give people calorie intake. We're bringing in blankets, 500,000 blankets inside Gaza, and that's not enough mattresses. Everybody in Gaza lost everything, and they need everything. So we're getting some drinking water, but if we didn't have enough fuel, we can't pump it from the 8 wells. There are 8 operational wells inside Gaza.
Thank you.
And even pumping water and delivering to shelters. Imagine a school that's designed to accommodate 4,000 people. Now it has 16,000 people on average. A shelter has 4 times its capacity. So when you think about that, we don't think about restrooms, for example. There is a situation where 500 people share a toilet per day, or 1,100 people share a shower per day. So there's a lot of those logistical things that create problems, and we are in the winter season. We're seeing skin diseases being 3 times the spread rate inside those crowded shelters.
Hani, it is very difficult to interrupt you, but I must. It's both what you and Vivian have shared have given us the stark reality in which Palestinians are enduring the situation now in Gaza. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing, that UNRWA is doing. We are correctly focused on Gaza in terms of demanding a ceasefire, but it's incredibly important that we understand what Palestinians are enduring extends into the West Bank and East Jerusalem as well. I want to go next to Omar Shakir, who is the Israel-Palestine Director for Human Rights Watch. Omar, I believe we have you with us. Bear with us a moment. It's just a couple of second delay on Zoom. Okay, we'll come back to Omar. Also with us today, we're honored to have State Representative Abdelnasser Rashid. You've done incredible work representing your constituents, and as a public servant, I want to start by saying thank you for that first. But you've also been keenly aware of the situation more broadly in the West Bank and East Jerusalem as well. If you could share a bit about that with us today.
Sure. Thank you, Maya. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me start by thanking Rainbow Push, thank you, Reverend Jackson, and all the hosting organizations for putting on this inspiring and absolutely essential gathering. Thank you for all of your work. My name is Abdelnasser Rashid. I'm a state representative for parts of the southwest side of Chicago and the southwest suburbs, including parts of Little Palestine. I was elected last year, and I'm the only Palestinian American in the Illinois legislature. As Maya said, the focus is rightfully and appropriately on what's happening in Gaza, as we no longer are saying a genocide is unfolding. It's happened, and it's happening now. In October, we were warning of the march toward genocide, and unfortunately, we've seen just such horrific devastation, and it deserves the attention. But I do want to speak for a moment about what's happening in the West Bank and Jerusalem, and then pivot to what we need to be doing moving forward. Israel's taking advantage of what's happening in Gaza to unleash absolutely horrific violence throughout the West Bank, in Jenin, in Tul Karim, in Hebron, In villages throughout the West Bank, you have both settlers invading villages, committing horrors against Palestinians. They disrupted the olive harvest season that was supposed to be going the most important months are October and November. And most Palestinians, I know for sure in the Ramallah area, were not able to harvest most of their olives. And for many families whose subsistence depends on the olive harvest, that was a devastating economic blow to them due to settler violence, due to fear of settler violence. And it's not just the settlers, it's the Israeli military itself and the Israeli police that are also raiding villages and also using airstrikes, which is a newer tactic in the West Bank. Unfortunately, we've been used to horrific airstrikes in Gaza for a very long time. Israel has generally not used them frequently in the West Bank, and we're seeing more airstrikes, more drones going in. In just a few days ago in Jenin, 7 people were killed due to an airstrike in Jenin. And so the West Bank is on fire as well. Not close to the level of devastation that we're seeing in Gaza, as we all know, but it's important to know that for Israel, this is a multi-front effort. They are trying to ethnically cleanse Gaza, but they're also setting the stage for ethnic cleansing in the West Bank and in Jerusalem, which they've been doing slowly for decades. I was in the West Bank over the summer. I was born here in Chicago in Cook County Hospital, but my parents moved me and some of my siblings back to Palestine when I was 5 years old, where I lived for 6 years in my village of Tormosaya. And over the summer, I was eager to go back and reconnect with family and friends and relatives, and went with my wife and our 3 kids. And while we were there, Israeli settlers invaded the village, torched an entire neighborhood, and killed a young man. And there was widespread fear of what could happen to the village because the Israeli military allowed the settlers to come in unchecked. I remember my daughter holding on to me, saying, "Dad, what do we do if we get shot?" The next night, she wouldn't go to sleep, said, "I hear that the settlers can come at night. I'm not going to sleep." And I had to explain to my children what every Palestinian parent has to do, which is to let them know that the Israeli government doesn't care about our safety, that the Israeli government could care less if we are hurt or if we are killed, and so we have to do our part to protect ourselves and to fight for ourselves. This is a conversation that I know many in this country are familiar with. And what I want to say to proponents of Zionism that think that brute force and influencing political power in this country is going to get them what they want. My children are going to be fighting for Palestinian liberation as long as it takes. And not only my 3 kids, but God willing, my son who will be born next month. In February of 2024, I hope that before he reaches adulthood, we have peace and coexistence and security for everyone, for Israelis and for Palestinians. But if we don't, he's going to be fighting for justice here and abroad and for Palestinian freedom. So if you think that your current hold on power in Israel and influencing the actions of our president and our Secretary of State and our Congress is going to somehow lead to peace and security for you at the expense of Palestinians, you've got something else coming. And it's not just me, it's every Palestinian family. This is who we are. This is who we are. So I want to turn to a moment to what we need to do. We've heard absolutely inspiring remarks and analyses. But we have work to do, and I think we know, some of it is obvious. We need our members of Congress and our president to call and push for a ceasefire. But we should ask every single member of Congress to insist, to commit that they will not vote to send a single more dollar to Israel until this issue is resolved. So ceasefire and no more military aid. The city of Chicago is about to vote on a resolution for a ceasefire and can be the largest city in the country calling for a ceasefire. Call every single alderman in the city of Chicago and ask them to co-sponsor the ceasefire resolution led by Alderwoman Rosanna Rodriguez and Alderman La Espada. Please, that's every one of us here in the room. Call your alderman, ask him to do that. And finally, and I'm going to end here, Maya, my colleagues in Springfield, there is a national sign-on letter for state legislators and local elected officials also calling for a ceasefire. Call your state representative, call your state senator and the aldermen and other local elected officials and ask them to sign on to Jewish Voice for Peace statement. And I'm happy afterwards to make sure that we get that distributed to everybody. So again, I want to thank Rainbow Push, AAI, and all the hosts for doing this. We've got our work cut out for us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Representative Rashid. I believe we have Omar now, who is the Israel-Palestine Director with Human Rights Watch. Omar?
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
Hear you. Yes, go ahead, Omar. Thank you.
Great. So first of all, my apologies that I can't be there with you in person. I've recently sort of been spending more time in Chicago. My wife's doing a PhD here, and I've never felt the divide between the north side and the south side as much as during a snowstorm, where the roads up here aren't super easy to navigate. But I'm happy to be able to join you virtually. And I didn't have the benefit, because of some technical issues, of hearing the other speakers. So I apologize in advance if there's some repetition with what my esteemed colleagues covered. What I'll try to do in my 7 minutes is to briefly outline Human Rights Watch's assessment of the human rights situation on the ground in Israel-Palestine. There's so much happening. We really have we recently yesterday said that 2023 featured the worst year for human rights in Israel-Palestine in the modern history of the region. Unprecedented levels of killings, of atrocities, of repression. So I'll just highlight a few things and look forward, hopefully, to discussing them more in our conversation. The first point to note is, before I start with what's happened since October 7th, we have to sort of take a step back and understand what the reality was in Gaza and in the region more broadly on October 6th, on the day before. And the key point to underscore is Gaza is part of the occupied Palestinian territory. It's been under an Israeli occupation since 1967. That's an occupation characterized by systematic human rights abuse, as Human Rights Watch has documented. Israel, even though it withdrew its ground forces and its settler population in 2005. Settlements are war crimes under international humanitarian law. It has retained control over borders, over airspace, over access to territorial waters, movement of people and goods outside of Egypt, control of the population registry, which issues ID cards that you need for movement, control over the infrastructure that Gaza relies upon, natural resources, security. I could go on and on. So despite that shift, Israel retains those obligations. Since 2007, it's imposed a closure policy. These are sweeping restrictions on the movement of people and goods, a generalized ban on travel, nobody in, nobody out, absent narrow humanitarian exemptions, sweeping restrictions, as I noted, on goods coming in or out, which has crippled the economy of Gaza. 80% of the population before October 7th relied on humanitarian aid, the very aid that's now being obstructed from entry. The majority of the population spent about half their day without electricity. So you have a context of 16 years of closure, more than a half century of an abusive occupation. The majority of Gaza's population are themselves refugees who were forced to flee or expelled from their homes inside Israel during the events of 1948, and their descendants, and they've been denied their right under international law to return to their homes. Human Rights Watch has found that Israel's treatment of Palestinians amounts to the crimes against humanity of apartheid and persecution. Again, I don't have the time to go in depth in how we reached that finding, but it's based on an overarching policy between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea that we've documented to maintain the domination by Jewish Israelis over Palestinians vis-a-vis control of land and demographics, combined with the very serious and significant repression against Palestinians and grave abuses committed. And happy to discuss that more in the Q&A. All that is to say, on October 6th, so before the beginning of these hostilities, Palestinians were facing daily structural violence, were facing war crimes and crimes against humanity on October 6th. So on October 7th, we saw Palestinian armed groups carried out heinous attacks inside Israel proper. It included the deliberate killing of civilians and the taking of more than 200 people, including many civilians, hostage into Gaza. These are war crimes. There is no justification for them. We are also investigating the harrowing allegations of sexual violence that took place on October 7th. Nothing can justify the killings and the hostage taking that we discussed in the other grave abuses. Since October 7th, the Israeli government has largely sealed its crossings into Gaza. They've opened them temporarily the last couple of weeks to allow some goods in. They have cut off electricity and water to the civilian population. That is textbook collective punishment, which is a war crime. They've also obstructed the entry of aid vis-a-vis Egypt and Rafah, limiting what can be allowed in, but also limiting the aid that where it's able to go within Gaza. The obstruction of life-saving aid is a war crime under international law. The Israeli government has, as Human Rights Watch has documented, has also used starvation as a weapon of war. We documented that based on what I just noted about obstructing aid and blocking entry and exit of goods into Gaza and of aid, food, and medicine. In addition, it's been apparently deliberately raising agricultural land that the population relies on for food and for exports, as well as destroying objects necessary for human survival. Bakeries, granaries, water sanitation facilities, etc. And finally, it's based on statements of the Israeli government making clear that it is cutting food, aid, medicine, water, fuel as part of a political strategy, in essence, to secure their objectives in this conflict. In addition, we've seen airstrikes at a scale that's unprecedented. You have about 1,200, when it comes to, I should note, on October 7th, about 1,200, according to the Israeli government, people killed, the majority of civilians. When it comes to Gaza, more than 23,000, the majority of whom are civilians, including thousands of children who have been killed. Israel has used explosive weapons with wide area effects in densely populated areas, even though 83 countries signed a declaration not to use heavy bombs and heavy artillery in densely populated areas. Human Rights Watch has documented the use of white phosphorus, which is unlawful when used in populated areas because it's indiscriminate, causes lifelong suffering and excruciating burns. We have documented unlawful airstrikes by the Israeli government, strikes that have hit hospitals, schools, UN facilities, that have hit centers holding displaced people. Israeli airstrikes have reduced entire neighborhoods to rubble. In addition, the majority of Gaza's population is displaced. 1.9 million people, 85% of the population. Forced displacement is a war crime under international law. I should note Palestinian armed groups have been lobbying rockets towards Israeli communities. These are indiscriminate attacks and war crimes. In addition, much of Gaza's infrastructure and housing has been damaged or destroyed. The majority of homes have been damaged and destroyed according to local authorities, and northern Gaza increasingly seems unlivable for the population. All this is to say, and of course the healthcare system has been decimated, so you see really grave commission of war crimes in Gaza and Israel proper. And then in the West Bank, and I think I heard the last part of the last presentation, but you have settler violence at a rate we haven't seen in years, more than 1,000 people displaced since October 7th, citing settler violence. The rate has almost doubled from what was already a years-long high before October 7th. Entire communities before October 7th displaced. You have more Palestinians who were killed in the West Bank between October 7th and the end of 2023 than in any year since the UN began systematically recording fatalities. There were more Palestinians killed in 2023, more than 2x than any other year since the UN began recording fatalities. There are more Palestinians being held in administrative detention without trial or charge than in more than 30 years, more than 3,000 Palestinians. I could go on and on. on, but I've reached the end of my time. So I want to sort of end by saying why this gathering is so important. We are seeing, we're approaching 100 days. We're seeing unprecedented atrocities and killings. They're continuing day in and day out. The situation continues to deteriorate. It is clear the Israeli government will not change course. It is clear that, Hamas and Palestinian groups will not release the hostages. These are, ending unlawful attacks, allowing aid in, releasing. These are basic obligations of international law. So it's incumbent upon civil society, states, and the international community to take action ultimately to protect international law. And that's why I'm so glad that this conversation is happening, and look forward to hopefully getting more in discussion about what's happening and what can be done. Thank you.
Omar, thank you so very much. Deep, deep gratitude to Vivian, Hani, Omar, and Abdelnasser for the work that you all are doing, and for sharing with us what is clear in terms of what Palestinians are enduring today. Humanity would dictate that we should care, period, full stop. But colleagues, as Americans, folks sometimes ask the question, as if it should ever be asked, but why are we so focused on the pain and suffering from Palestinians and what is happening in this part of the world? And I think one of the most important things for us to understand is that we have agency in this. American policy, our tax dollars, our silence on a ceasefire is enabling the stark reality that our distinguished panel has just laid out for us. So while we should care about suffering everywhere because humanity dictates that we care about each other, we also have to understand the role we have played in 75 years of dispossession, in 67 years of occupation, and in what is happening today. So I want